Hello, this is Brett, and this is the fourth video in our tutorial about my first website. So when we created our Ernie Sports Deli page, we were using div tags. And those are just tags that say that this is dividing this content from the logo, from the nav, from everything else. And it helps break up sections of the page. And when you get into CSS, you can start to style these separate sections. Well, one thing that becomes difficult is that this div tag doesn't really have a lot of meaning other than it is dividing one section from another section. So HTML5 has introduced a number of semantic elements that allow us to better explain what's on the page and what those sections are doing than just using standard div tags. So from the documentation, you can see it says many websites contain HTML code like div ID equals nav, or div class header, or div ID footer. And when we get into CSS, we would have had to do this same thing. HTML offers new semantic elements to define different parts of the web page. So rather than just using div tags, we'll use these elements to help describe better what our website is doing. This makes it more discoverable to another coder to make it easier to read. It also makes it better for the web browser to understand the different sections of the page, mainly for SEO, which is search engine optimization, which allows Google to say, hey, these are the main parts of the page, and we should show those to people or not in a search engine. So SEO isn't covered in what we're doing now, but just know that there's other benefits to this. So I like it mainly for the discoverability, meaning other programmers can quickly get an idea of what's going on. So we'll start with a header. Our header in here, let's go to this page, really consists of this section here and the image for their logo, and then our little H1 tag that we have here that is their slogan. So I'm going to just come in here and I'm typing header, and I'm going to wrap this whole section with header. And so we know that this section is our header. When we refresh the page, you can see that nothing really changes. If I inspect the element here, you can see this division here that's created. And if I hover it over, it'll show me in blue at the top that this box, this division, is 881 pixels by 18 pixels. And that's just auto-scaled the box to be 100% of the width of the browser, and 18 is the height of the content that we have in here. So if we were to actually increase our browser size, this div, you'll see, actually increases in its width to almost 1500 pixels. So it's auto-scaling the size of that box. If we click on the header, you can see that that box is consuming that entire section, which has our top section in there, our top div here, our next div there, and the header that wraps that creates a box that's that entire height. So we could also come in here and maybe, rather than call these divs, we could call these sections. Section and section, and that may be a little bit more clear. That it does contain two sections, and that was the language I used as I was explaining to you, so that may be helpful when somebody else comes to read the code. But again, you can see it doesn't really change anything. These semantic elements don't really do anything there. They're just for explaining what's going on. So we have our header here. We also have our nav, which we already used the nav tag, and we explained that before. And then going down to the bottom, we have a div tag for our main content here. So rather than using a div, they have an element for main right here, which explains the main content. So I'll switch out that div to be main. And again, no functionality change. It doesn't change any behavior. This just is programming so that this can be better understood. And then lastly, down here we have our footer. And so we'll switch that out to footer. and footer. We'll save that. We'll refresh, and everything looks about the same. So later when we use CSS, this will be a lot easier because we don't have to start tagging or giving classes to this section, but we can just reference it by the header. Same with this section, we can reference it by the nav, the name nav, and then in the main we can reference it by the name main, and the footer we can reference by footer. And so you'll see that. Hopefully that makes sense. If you come to Semantic Elements, they talk a little bit more about that. Remember to keep going through the tutorial, finish this complete tutorial, and then when that's finished, we'll move on to CSS. We'll go through the CSS tutorial, and some of these concepts will start making sense. But we'll introduce you to them now, and we'll introduce you to them later. Have a good day.